He spent his life cleaning floors, until one melody reminded him who he used to be. The morning light filtered through the tall glass windows of Sterling Industries, stretching long, pale shadows across the marble lobby. The scent of freshly polished floors mixed with the faint tang of coffee drifting from the executive lounge. Jake Martinez pushed his cleaning cart through the revolving doors, shoulders heavy from another sleepless night. The wheels squeaked against the marble, a sound he had come to hate, mechanical, repetitive, hollow. It was the rhythm of a man who had stopped dreaming long ago. At 35, Jake looked older than his years. His hands were cracked and rough, marked by years of chemical cleaners and hard labor. His uniform hung loosely on his lean frame, and his face carried the quiet exhaustion of someone who had learned to blend into the background. He was invisible here, the man who came before dawn and left long after everyone else had gone home. That was how you survived when you were the janitor. You stayed unseen, you didn't make noise, you didn't exist. Yet, every morning, before the city fully woke, Jake found one reason to keep going. Her name was Sophie. 5 years old, a bundle of laughter and curls, the only bright thing left from a marriage that had fallen apart 6 years ago. Sophie was his entire world. When he left their small apartment each day, she was still asleep, her tiny hand always curled around the stuffed rabbit she'd named Melody. He kissed her forehead, whispered, "Be good for Daddy, Angel," and walked into a world that never saw him. The day began like any other. The echo of high heels and elevator dings, the distant murmur of executives talking in clipped tones about profits and deadlines. Jake moved silently through the building, his mop and broom extensions of his body, his thoughts drifting back to the life he'd once imagined. A life where music had filled every corner. His grandmother's small Brooklyn apartment had been where he'd first fallen in love with sound. She used to sit by the window with her old upright piano, her frail fingers coaxing miracles out of cracked ivory keys. She had taught him to play when he was 8, told him music was the soul's language when words failed. But that piano had been sold years ago, a casualty of bills, rent, and reality. He was buffing the chrome handles of the elevator when he heard it, faint at first, barely more than a whisper beneath the hum of the air vents. A melody, pure and haunting, drifting from somewhere high above. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Every note floated through the building like a ghost, graceful and aching at once. Jake froze, his breath catching in his throat. That song. He hadn't heard it in years. His grandmother had loved that piece, played it every Sunday morning while the sunlight poured through her curtains. He closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. And for a fleeting moment, the years peeled away. He wasn't a janitor anymore. He was the boy sitting on a piano bench beside his grandmother, his small fingers following hers as she whispered, "Listen, Jake, don't just play the notes, feel them." The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding, snapping him back to the present. But the melody continued, stronger now, floating down from the 42nd floor. The executive level. Jake hesitated. That floor wasn't part of his routine until later in the morning, after the executives arrived. Still, something inside him, something he thought had died years ago, pushed him forward. He stepped into the elevator, pressed the button, and felt the smooth ascent lift him toward the sound that was calling to him. The doors opened to a different world. The executive floor was all glass and chrome, the air perfumed with wealth and silence. His footsteps felt too loud against the polished floor. The music led him toward a massive conference room where sunlight spilled across a gleaming black Steinway grand piano. And there she was, Emma Sterling. She stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection glimmering against the glass skyline. At 33, Emma was the kind of woman people described in headlines and whispers. Billion-dollar deals, impossible negotiations, a reputation for perfection. Her auburn hair was pulled into a sleek chignon, her posture immaculate, her expression unreadable. But right now, she wasn't looking at stock charts or contracts. She was staring out at the city, utterly still, listening. The pianist was gone. The bench sat empty, the final notes of the nocturne fading into silence. Yet the air still vibrated with the memory of music. Jake stopped just beyond the doorway, instinctively staying in the shadows. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from something older, something almost sacred. The sight of that piano stirred memories he had buried beneath years of mops and bleach. The way the sunlight hit the polished surface, the way the keys gleamed like pearls. It was beauty he had forgotten existed. He wanted to touch it, just once, to feel the cool ivory beneath his fingertips again. But he didn't move. Men like him didn't belong near things like that. Emma turned slightly, as though sensing someone's presence. Her gaze swept the room, sharp and calculating until it landed on him. Jake froze, embarrassed, ready to stammer an apology. But instead of anger, he saw something unexpected in her eyes. Curiosity. For a long, suspended moment, neither of them spoke. The sunlight painted both of them in gold, two strangers from opposite worlds connected by a melody that refused to die. And then, with the faintest trace of amusement tugging at her lips, she said softly, "Do you play?" The question hung between them, simple, impossible, and about to change both their lives forever. She laughed and said, "If you can play something that moves me, I'll marry you." I thought she was joking until my daughter walked in. For a moment, Jake thought he'd misheard her. The question hung in the air, suspended like the final note of a song. "Do you play?" She had said it with such calm confidence, as if it were perfectly natural to ask a janitor something like that. Emma Sterling, billionaire CEO, goddess of the 42nd floor, was staring directly at him, her green eyes sharp, yet strangely curious. "I used to," Jake said quietly, gripping the handle of his cleaning cart like a lifeline. His voice sounded foreign in this pristine place. "A long time ago." "Used to?" Emma tilted her head, studying him as though she could see through his carefully built walls. "You were listening like someone who understood what the music was saying." Jake shifted uneasily. "My grandmother taught me when I was a kid," he admitted. "But that was before life got busy." "Life always gets busy," Emma murmured, half to herself. She looked toward the empty piano bench, then sighed. "My pianist canceled on me. Big investor meeting in an hour, and I thought live music might soften the mood." She smiled faintly, a rare, human smile. "Now I'll have to rely on my charm alone." Jake had read about her in business magazines, ruthless, brilliant, untouchable. Seeing her joke, even lightly, unsettled him. He should have walked away, gone back to polishing doorknobs or scrubbing floors. But something about her presence held him there. "What would you have played?" he asked, before he could stop himself. "Something classic," she said. "Something that makes people feel things they don't understand. That's good for business." She turned to him again, her eyes glinting with sudden mischief. "Tell me, Jake, could you do that? Play something that makes me feel?" He blinked. "Ma'am, if you can touch that piano and play something that moves me to tears." She paused, lips curling in a teasing smile. "I'll marry you." Jake froze, unsure whether she was mocking him. The laugh that followed told him she was, at least partly. But there was something else behind it, too. Loneliness. Challenge. A flicker of daring curiosity that made her look less like a CEO and more like a woman who had forgotten how to feel. "I think you've got the wrong guy," Jake said, trying to laugh it off. "I clean pianos. I don't play them anymore." "That's a shame," she said softly, walking closer. Her heels clicked against the marble, sharp, measured, deliberate. "Because for a moment when you were listening, I saw something I don't see often in this building." "What's that?" "Wonder." Jake had no idea what to say to that. He looked away, pretending to adjust his mop handle, hoping she'd lose interest. But before either of them could speak again, the elevator dinged. The doors slid open, and a small voice rang through the sterile air. "Daddy!" Jake's heart dropped. Sophie. He had completely forgotten. It was Saturday. Her babysitter was sick, and he had promised she could come to work with him for a few hours while he finished his shift. Emma's eyes widened as Sophie came running out, curls bouncing, clutching her little backpack. "This is where you work?" she gasped, looking around the sleek, glass-walled corridor. "It's so shiny." Jake bent down, trying to keep his voice steady. "Sweetheart, remember what we talked about? Daddy has to be careful at work, okay?" But Sophie had already spotted the piano. Her eyes lit up like sunrise. "Daddy, look, a real piano." "Sophie, wait!" Before he could stop her, she darted across the room and climbed onto the bench, her small legs dangling. Her fingers hovered above the keys with a familiarity that made Emma pause. Jake opened his mouth to apologize, to explain. But then Sophie pressed her first key. The sound was delicate, uncertain. Then her hands began to move. Slowly at first, then with growing confidence, flowing from one note to the next. The melody that filled the room wasn't a simple children's tune. It wasn't even something Jake had taught her. It was something older, deeper, haunting, and impossibly beautiful. Emma turned, transfixed. The air seemed to thicken, as though time itself had paused to listen. Sophie's tiny fingers danced over the ivory keys, weaving threads of emotion Jake couldn't name. The music rose and fell like a whisper, and a cry at once, soft but powerful, fragile yet unbroken. The glass walls caught the echoes and carried them down the hallway, spilling into the open offices beyond. One by one, people began to appear, secretaries, analysts, even the security guard, drawn by the sound. No one spoke. They just stood, watching this small girl pour her soul into the piano. Jake stood frozen, tears stinging his eyes. This was beyond anything he'd ever seen. Sophie was playing with an emotion she couldn't possibly understand. Yet somehow she did. Emma moved closer to the piano, her usual composure gone. Her hand pressed against her heart as if to hold it in place. The melody shifted, becoming lighter, almost hopeful. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The final note lingered, trembling in the air before fading into silence. For a moment, the entire executive floor was still, the kind of silence that feels alive. Not empty, but full of awe. Sophie turned on the bench, her curls framing her small, radiant face. "Did you like my song, pretty lady?" she asked sweetly. Emma blinked, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "It was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Jake swallowed hard, unsure whether to feel pride or fear. Something extraordinary had just happened, and nothing about their lives would ever be the same again. When Sophie finished, Emma Sterling was crying. A 5-year-old sat at the grand piano and played like the soul of heaven itself had borrowed her hands. The first note was soft, almost a whisper against the vastness of the executive floor. It shimmered in the air, fragile and uncertain, before giving birth to a melody that grew like light spilling through a cracked door. Sophie's tiny hands hovered for a heartbeat, then began to move with purpose, with grace, with something that didn't belong to this world. It wasn't clumsy or childlike. There were no halting rhythms or wrong keys, no fumbling as one might expect from a 5-year-old. Every motion was fluid, every note chosen as though she'd known this piano all her life. Her small shoulders rose and fell in rhythm with the sound, her head tilted slightly, eyes half closed. She wasn't reading from sheet music. She wasn't reading anything. She was remembering something. Something beyond words. The opening bars were unmistakable, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. But Sophie wasn't just repeating it. She was reinterpreting it. There was depth in her phrasing, emotion in her pauses. When the melody dipped into sadness, Her fingers seemed to tremble with it. When it rose into joy, her lips curved in a faint, almost secret smile. Jake stood frozen in the doorway, unable to breathe. He had taught Sophie nursery rhymes, scales, a few beginner melodies on his grandmother's old keyboard. But nothing like this. What he was hearing now was something no one could have taught. It was as if the spirit of every great pianist who ever lived had slipped into his daughter's small frame, and was using her as a vessel. The room began to change around her. Secretaries and assistants paused in the hall, drawn by the sound. Executives poked their heads from glass-walled offices. Even the janitorial staff on the lower floor stopped their work, looking up as the melody carried through the building's central atrium. By the time Sophie transitioned into a new theme, her own improvised melody, there were at least 24 people gathered outside the conference room. No one spoke. No one dared to. Emma Sterling stood among them, motionless, her polished image slipping away with each note. Her face, usually so composed, softened in a way that no one in the company had ever seen. The music was doing something to her, cracking open a part of her soul that had been locked away for years beneath the weight of balance sheets and boardrooms. Her father had once told her music was weakness. Emotion has no place in business, he'd said. And Emma had believed him. She had spent her adult life building walls so nothing could touch her. But this child's music, moved through those walls like light through glass, finding every hidden fracture. When the melody shifted, it no longer sounded like Chopin. It was something new, softer, more intimate. The sound of longing and belonging, of someone reaching for something they could feel but not yet touch. Jake realized, with a shiver, that it sounded like home. Sophie leaned closer to the keys, her brow furrowing in concentration. The notes poured out faster now, overlapping, twisting together until they built to a gentle storm. Then, just as quickly, they fell away, like rain evaporating under sunlight. The final chord lingered in the still air, trembling faintly, as if afraid to fade completely. Then silence. The kind of silence that's sacred. No one moved. Not even Sophie. She sat perfectly still, her fingers resting on the keys, breathing softly, as though waking from a dream. Jake's throat tightened. "Sophie," he whispered, his voice breaking the hush. "Sweetheart, where did you learn that?" Sophie turned, her curls catching the morning light. "I don't know," she said simply, her eyes wide and clear. "It just came out, like it was already waiting for me." Someone in the crowd let out a shaky breath. A woman dabbed at her eyes. The spell broke slowly, gently, like dawn returning after a long night. Emma moved first. She crossed the room in slow, deliberate steps, her heels echoing faintly against the marble. She knelt beside Sophie, the immaculate CEO suddenly looking very human. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," she whispered. "Do you know what you just did?" Sophie tilted her head, thoughtful. "I played what the piano wanted me to play." Emma smiled through her tears. "No, sweetheart. You played what people needed to hear." Jake could barely speak. He wanted to ask questions, how, why, what this meant, but his mind was spinning too fast. Sophie had played Chopin, then something original, something divine. He crouched beside her, his rough hands trembling as he brushed a curl from her forehead. "Baby, did you dream this song?" Sophie thought for a moment, then nodded. "Sometimes I hear songs in my sleep," she said softly. "But they sound sad when I wake up, so I try to make them happy again." Emma's eyes filled again, and she looked up at Jake. "She's extraordinary. Jake, she's not just talented, she's a prodigy." Jake shook his head in disbelief. "I don't even know how she learned half those chords. She's never had a teacher." Emma stood, still shaken, and turned toward the small crowd that had gathered. "Everyone, back to work," she said gently, her voice more fragile than authoritative. The employees scattered reluctantly, whispering, eyes wide with wonder. When they were alone again, Emma walked toward the window, looking out over the city as if she needed the horizon to steady her. "Jake," she said after a long silence, "do you understand what this means? This kind of gift, it's 1 in a million." He followed her gaze, staring out at the skyline. "I don't care what it means," he said, quietly. "I just want her to be okay. She's all I've got." Emma turned to face him, and in her eyes, Jake saw something shift, a decision forming, quiet but resolute. The kind of decision that changes lives. "I think I just made a promise I need to keep," she whispered, more to herself than to him. Emma looked at Jake with trembling eyes and said, "I think I just made a promise I need to keep. She offered me everything I'd ever wanted. But part of me wondered what it would cost. The coffee shop was almost empty, its quiet hum of espresso machines and clinking cups a strange contrast to the chaos that had upended Jake's life. Monday mornings usually meant bleach, floors, and fluorescent lights. But this Monday was different. This morning he sat across from Emma Sterling, the billionaire whose name was printed on every building he'd ever cleaned. Sunlight slanted through the cafe windows, catching the steam from her untouched cappuccino. Emma looked nothing like the formidable woman from the boardroom. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, her makeup lighter, her posture softer. But the intensity in her eyes remained, the same unshakable resolve that could close multi-million-dollar deals without a tremor. Jake fidgeted with his paper cup, feeling out of place in his work jacket and worn jeans. "You didn't have to meet me here," he said finally. "I know you're busy." "I wanted to," she said simply, stirring her coffee though she never took a sip. "After Saturday, I couldn't stop thinking about your daughter." Jake's heart tightened. "Sophie?" Emma nodded, her expression unreadable. "She's remarkable. I've seen talent before, but this is different. It's not something that can be taught." "She's 5, Jake said, a note of warning in his tone. "She's not ready for all this attention." Emma leaned forward. "Jake, listen to me. What your daughter did, it wasn't normal. She played Chopin like someone who's lived a lifetime of pain and beauty. Do you know what that means?" Jake stared down at his hands, rough and calloused from years of labor. "It means she's gifted, but it doesn't mean I want her turned into some kind of spectacle." Emma's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed calm. "I'm not talking about exploiting her. I'm talking about protecting her gift. She deserves training, access to real teachers, opportunities you and I can't even imagine." Jake looked up sharply. "You mean opportunities I can't afford?" There was no accusation in his voice, just exhaustion, the kind that comes from too many bills and not enough tomorrows. Emma didn't answer right away. She just studied him, her gaze softer than he expected. "I meant what I said," she said at last. Jake blinked. "About what?" Emma hesitated, as if testing how far she could push before he pulled away. Then she said it, calmly, almost matter-of-factly. "Marry me." The words landed between them like a dropped glass. For a moment, Jake wondered if he'd misheard her. "What?" Emma leaned back, meeting his stunned gaze. "You heard me. Marry me." He laughed, a sharp, incredulous sound. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious," she replied, though her lips twitched at the corner. "You said it yourself, Jake. You're worried about Sophie's future. You can't protect her alone, not from what's coming. The media, the pressure, the so-called talent scouts. With me, she'd have everything she needs. Education, security, the best mentors in the world." Jake shook his head, his heart pounding. "You don't even know us. You met my daughter once." Emma's eyes softened. "And she changed something in me. I can't explain it, but when she played, it felt like hearing something I'd lost a long time ago." He studied her face, trying to see past the confidence. "You really mean this, don't you?" She nodded slowly. "I grew up alone. My parents died when I was 12. My grandfather raised me to take over the company, to win, to never depend on anyone. And I did. I built an empire, but I built it on emptiness. No family, no warmth, no one waiting for me at the end of the day. When I saw you and Sophie," her voice cracked slightly, I realized I've spent my whole life building walls around myself. Maybe I'm ready to build something else now. Jake's throat tightened. Emma, this isn't a fairy tale. You don't just buy your way into a family. I'm not trying to buy one, she said, her tone sharp but wounded. I'm trying to find one. Silence settled between them. Outside, the morning traffic swelled, a taxi horn blaring somewhere down the street. Jake stared at his reflection in his coffee. He wanted to believe her. God help him, part of him did. But another part, the cautious, tired part, knew what this kind of world could do to people like him. If I say yes? He asked quietly. What happens when the news gets out? When people start saying I married the boss to climb the ladder? What happens to Sophie when they start chasing her with cameras? Emma didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her untouched drink, the foam long gone cold. Then I'll protect her, she said finally. From the world, from the press, even from myself if I have to. Jake opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, his phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen. A message from Sophie's teacher. His stomach sank as he read it aloud. Sophie played something for her class this morning. The principal wants to meet with me. Says it might be special needs related? He looked up, bewildered. She's 5. What could that even mean? Emma's eyes widened slightly. It's starting, she murmured. People are noticing her. Jake put the phone down, his hand shaking. I can't let this get out of control. I just wanted her to have a normal life. There's no going back to normal, Emma said softly. Not after what she did. The world won't forget a child who plays like that. Jake rubbed his face, the weight of it all pressing down on him. Then what do I do? Emma hesitated, her own voice trembling as she reached across the table. Then let me help you protect her. Emma reached across the table, her voice trembling. Then let me help you protect her. We walked into a mansion built for power, but my daughter made it sound like home. The moment the black sedan rolled through the towering iron gates of the Sterling estate, Jake realized how far he'd stepped outside the boundaries of his own world. The long, tree-lined drive opened into a view that seemed to belong in a magazine. Sweeping lawns, marble fountains, and a mansion that glowed golden under the late afternoon sun. Sophie pressed her face to the window, eyes wide. Daddy, she whispered, is this a castle? Jake smiled weakly, though his stomach was tight with nerves. Something like that, sweetheart. Emma Sterling stood waiting at the grand entrance, elegant even in casual clothes. The last rays of daylight caught the copper tones in her hair, turning her into a vision of warmth against the cold perfection of the estate. When she saw Sophie, her expression softened instantly. Welcome home, she said. The words seemed to hang in the air, fragile and impossible. Inside, the house was a cathedral of wealth, vaulted ceilings, polished marble floors, chandeliers like crystal galaxies. Jake couldn't bring himself to step too far past the threshold. His boots felt wrong here, his calloused hands out of place against the silk-smooth banisters. It's like a storybook, Sophie said, spinning in the middle of the foyer, her curls bouncing as her laughter filled the space. Do you live here all by yourself? Not anymore, Emma said gently. Come on, I want to show you something. She led them up the sweeping staircase, her heels soft against the carpeted steps. Portraits lined the hallway, stern-faced ancestors in oil paintings watching with eyes that had judged empires. Jake caught himself avoiding their gazes. He didn't belong here. He was a man who mopped floors for a living, and now he was walking through the home of the woman who owned half the city. Second thoughts? Emma asked quietly, glancing back at him. About 100, he admitted. They reached a door at the end of the hall. When Emma pushed it open, Sophie gasped. It was a child's dream. A princess room with soft pink walls, a canopy bed, a reading nook by the window, and shelves full of books and toys. But in the corner, bathed in the glow of a chandelier, stood a baby grand piano. Its black lacquer gleamed like still water. Sophie approached it as though it might vanish if she moved too quickly. Her small hand reached out to touch one key, pressing gently. The note rang out, pure and crystalline, echoing faintly through the room. "For me?" she asked, turning toward Emma. "All yours," Emma said, "so you can practice whenever you like." Sophie climbed onto the bench without hesitation, her little legs swinging as she positioned herself perfectly. Her fingers hovered over the keys. Then she began to play. It wasn't the complex brilliance of Chopin this time. It was something simpler, softer, an original melody, fragile as glass but overflowing with emotion. It sounded like gratitude and wonder braided together. The kind of song that makes you believe in second chances. Jake stood frozen, his heart swelling painfully in his chest. He'd seen Sophie play before, but never like this. Not with such tenderness, such quiet joy. Her music wrapped around the room, filling every inch of it, transforming marble and gold into warmth and light. Emma's hand rose to her mouth, her eyes glistening. "She's creating it," she whispered. "Right now, she's composing." Jake's voice caught. "That's not a song I've ever taught her." They both watched as Sophie swayed slightly with the rhythm, completely lost in her own world. For the first time since stepping into that house, Jake felt something shift inside him. The mansion wasn't sterile anymore. It wasn't intimidating or cold. It felt alive. Maria, the longtime housekeeper, appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed skeptically. She'd worked for the Sterlings for over 2 decades and had seen every kind of guest come and go. Her eyes flicked from Jake's worn clothes to Sophie at the piano. "Señorita Emma," she said in her thick Spanish accent, "the staff are asking, should they prepare the guest rooms?" "No," Emma said softly, never taking her eyes off Sophie. "They're not guests." Maria frowned but didn't argue. Her gaze drifted back to the piano as the melody deepened, growing more complex. Slowly her expression softened. "Dios mío," she murmured. "It sounds like prayer." The last notes faded, leaving the air trembling. Sophie turned on the bench, smiling shyly. "Did you like it?" Maria wiped at her eyes, pretending to adjust her glasses. "Sí, pequeña, I liked it very much." Jake laughed softly, kneeling beside his daughter. "What do you call that song?" Sophie thought for a moment, then said, "It's called Home." Emma's breath hitched, and something in her gaze shifted. An emotion Jake couldn't name. She had built a mansion, an empire, an entire world around herself. Yet it had never felt like home until this child sat at her piano and played her heart out. The silence that followed was full of something precious. Peace, maybe, or hope. Jake reached over and took Sophie's small hand in his. "You made this place beautiful, sweetheart," he said. "It already was," Sophie replied innocently. "It just needed music." For a moment, even Emma laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that filled the grand room with warmth. Maria smiled faintly and nodded to herself as she stepped out. "Now this house has a soul again," she whispered under her breath. But the spell broke a few minutes later, when the melodic chime of the front gate echoed through the halls. Emma turned, her expression tensing. Maria's voice carried up the staircase a moment later, urgent and uneasy. "Miss Emma," she called, "there's a woman at the gate. She says she's the little girl's mother." Jake's blood ran cold. The front gate chimed, and Maria announced a woman claiming to be Sophie's mother. She looked like a ghost from another life, and she called herself Sophie's mother. The afternoon sunlight had started to fade into the kind of golden haze that made the Sterling estate look like something out of a dream. Sophie's laughter still echoed faintly through the grand hall as her small fingers danced across the piano keys. But that serenity cracked the moment the intercom buzzed with Maria's uneasy voice. "Miss Emma," she said from downstairs, "there's a woman at the gate. She says she's the little girl's mother." Jake froze. For a moment, he thought he'd misheard. "What did she say?" Maria repeated herself, slower this time, her tone sharp with disbelief. Emma's head snapped toward Jake, eyes wide. Your ex-wife? Jake's throat went dry. Sarah, he said softly, his stomach sinking. It's got to be. He hadn't heard from Sarah Martinez in almost 5 years. The last message she'd ever sent him was a single line. You'll regret this. Then she was gone. No calls, no visits, no letters for Sophie. He'd convinced himself she was out of their lives for good. But now, as he stepped out onto the marble veranda with Emma beside him, he saw her through the wrought iron gate, and the sight made his heart twist. Sarah was beautiful, but in the way polished glass was beautiful, cold, reflective, and dangerous when it broke. Her long black hair fell over one shoulder, her sunglasses oversized and dramatic. She wore a designer coat the color of wine, a diamond bracelet glinting under the soft evening light. Behind her stood 2 men with cameras slung around their necks. Reporters. Jake, she called out, her red lips curving into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You look different. Emma's posture stiffened beside him. Reporters? She brought the press? Sarah laughed lightly, the sound sharp as glass. Relax, Miss Sterling. The world adores stories about people like you. Billionaire philanthropist, misunderstood single father, musical prodigy daughter. It's practically begging to be told. Jake's fists clenched. You shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be here, Sarah scoffed, taking a step forward. I'm her mother, Jake. Or have you told everyone I'm dead, too? Emma's voice was calm, but her eyes burned. If you truly cared about your daughter, you wouldn't have disappeared for 5 years. Sarah turned to her, smirking. And you must be her replacement, the CEO with the savior complex. Tell me, Emma, how does it feel, playing house with the help? Emma didn't flinch. I'm not playing house, she said coldly. I'm giving that child what you refused to. Sarah's laugh rang out, hollow and bitter. Oh, please. You think I'm the villain here? Let's talk about Jake, then. The noble janitor who somehow managed to end up in a billionaire's mansion. Did you tell her, Jake? Tell her about your little mistakes, your debts, your past? Stop it, Jake said, his voice low, controlled. You don't know what you're talking about. But Sarah wasn't listening. She turned toward the camera crew. Take this down. People deserve the truth. Sterling Industries CEO adopting her janitor's child? It's practically charity work. Enough! Emma's tone cut through the chaos like steel. She turned to Maria. Get Sophie inside. But it was too late. Sophie had already wandered out, her small hands clutching the edge of the veranda railing. Daddy? She called, her voice trembling. Who's that? Sarah's expression changed in an instant. Sweetness painted over venom. Sweetheart, she said, removing her sunglasses, her voice suddenly soft and sugary. Don't you recognize Mommy? Sophie frowned, clutching Jake's leg. You're not my mommy. My mommy doesn't cry. The words hit harder than any insult could have. Sarah's face faltered for a second, something human flickering in her eyes before hardening again. Jake knelt beside Sophie. Go inside, baby, it's okay. But Sophie didn't move. Instead, she turned toward the piano in the corner of the terrace. Without another word, she climbed onto the bench and began to play. The first notes trembled, hesitant. Then, as her emotions found their way into her fingers, the melody began to flow. It was unlike anything she'd played before, haunting, fragile, filled with confusion and sorrow. Every rise and fall of the music seemed to echo her fear, her hope, her need to make sense of the voices clashing around her. Even Sarah went still, the arrogance drained from her face as she watched her daughter, this child she barely knew, pour her heart into sound. For a moment, no one spoke. The reporters lowered their cameras. The music reached its peak, delicate and powerful, then faded into silence. Sarah's lips parted. She's incredible. Jake's voice was barely above a whisper. Yeah, she always was. Sarah blinked, and for the first time since she'd arrived, the facade cracked. Regret flickered in her eyes, but only for a second. Then she straightened, sliding her sunglasses back into place. "She gets that from me," she said briskly. "I was always talented." Emma stepped forward, her voice low and deliberate. "What do you want, Sarah?" Sarah smiled, a predator's smile. "What I'm owed. I never signed over full custody, which means legally she's still mine." Jake's heart pounded. "You abandoned her. You don't get to walk in here and—" "Oh, I do," Sarah interrupted, eyes gleaming, "especially now that she's famous." Jake froze. "What?" Sarah gestured to the men behind her. "You think I came here for you? I came for her. Do you know what a 5-year-old prodigy is worth to the media? To sponsors? To schools lining up to claim her?" Emma's voice dropped, cold and measured. "You're using your child as currency." Sarah shrugged. "Call it what you want. I call it making up for lost time." Before Jake could respond, a sharp burst of light exploded across the veranda. Then another. He turned sharply. The reporters had their cameras up again, shutters clicking like gunfire. "Perfect," Sarah murmured. "The world will eat this up." Sophie's hands froze over the keys. The melody died mid-note. Her eyes filled with confusion, fear, and something Jake hadn't seen in her before. Shame. Emma stepped forward to shield her, but it was too late. But when the last note faded, camera flashes filled the windows. The scandal had already gone public. One viral headline turned love into liability and nearly destroyed an empire. By dawn, the world already knew. What had begun as a private moment between 3 people, a child, her father, and a woman trying to protect them, had exploded into a public circus. Screens across the country lit up with the same headline, repeated in 1,000 variations. Billionaire CEO and janitor's secret romance, child prodigy at the center of scandal. Emma Sterling's photo was everywhere. One from her last investor conference, paired beside a grainy shot of Jake carrying Sophie through the Sterling estate gates. The captions told their own twisted version of the story: a love affair, a cover-up, a power play. And in the background of every image, Sophie's innocent face had become a weapon. Jake scrolled through the news articles, each word cutting deeper. They made him sound like a con man, the janitor who seduced the boss for money and fame. He could feel the judgment of millions pressing down on him from screens he'd never see, rooms he'd never enter. Meanwhile, in the Sterling boardroom, the air was sharp with panic. "The media won't let this go, Emma," snapped Richard Cole, the chief financial officer. "The merger with Yamamoto is collapsing by the hour. They think you've lost control." "Because of a child?" Emma's tone was clipped, restrained, but inside, her hands trembled beneath the table. "Not because of the child," Margaret Lee, the public relations head, said carefully. "Because of him, the janitor. The story looks inappropriate." Emma's jaw tightened. "His name is Jake Martinez, and he's not just a janitor. He's the father of a little girl who deserves better than this circus." Richard threw a file onto the table. "You've always been emotional about your causes, Emma, but this is a scandal. Investors are demanding explanations, and the Yamamoto board has frozen all communications until further notice. Do you realize what that means for our stock?" Emma stood slowly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. "Yes, it means they're scared. And that's fine. But I won't apologize for protecting a child who can't protect herself." The silence that followed was suffocating. No one dared speak, but their eyes said enough. Emma Sterling, the woman known for being untouchable, was bleeding credibility. By that evening, another blow landed. A leaked audio file surfaced online. The timestamp matched the morning Jake and Emma had met in the cafe. In it, Emma's voice could be heard saying, "If you can play something that moves me, I'll marry you." The clip was taken wildly out of context, spliced together with her later conversation about protecting Sophie. Social media had a field day. "Marry the Janitor" began trending, Memes flooded the internet, some mocking, some vicious. Late-night hosts turned it into punchlines. Jake saw one of the posts and shut his phone off, disgusted. But the damage was already done. Everywhere he went, every grocery store, every school pickup, he could feel eyes following him, whispering, judging. By the time Emma showed up at his apartment that night, exhaustion had replaced anger in her eyes. She'd been stripped bare by the media storm, her company, her reputation, her control. But Jake could barely look at her. "They leaked it," she said quietly. "The audio. It was supposed to be off the record. Someone from PR must have—" He cut her off. "You told them about the cafe?" "I didn't," she said, her voice cracking. "Jake, I swear I didn't." He paced across the living room, running a hand through his hair. "You said you'd protect us. But look around. You're everywhere, and my kid, our kid, can't even go to school without photographers outside." Emma swallowed hard. "I'm trying. But you don't understand what it's like up there. They don't want me to be human. They want me to be perfect." Jake turned, his voice low but sharp. "Then why drag us into your world? You could have left us where we were. Quiet, invisible, safe." Emma flinched. "You think I wanted this to happen? I wanted to give her a chance at something better." He stopped pacing, staring at her for a long moment. The fight drained out of his shoulders. "Maybe you did," he said softly. "But the world doesn't care about what we meant. They only see what they want to see." For the first time, Emma didn't have an answer. The woman who commanded. Boardrooms couldn't find words to defend herself to the one person who mattered. They sat in silence, the space between them filled with the hum of distant traffic and the faint creak of the radiator. Sophie was asleep in the next room, unaware that her music had shattered more than it had healed. After a long while, Jake spoke again, his voice quiet, almost resigned. "If this is real, it'll survive this," he said, meeting her gaze. "If not, we'll both know soon enough." Emma's eyes glistened. "Jake!" But he turned away, staring out the window into the cold blur of the city lights. Jake whispered, "If it's real, it'll survive this. If not, we'll both know soon enough. She built an empire with her bare hands and lost it all for a child's smile." The Sterling mansion, once alive with Sophie's laughter and Jake's quiet presence, had turned into an echo chamber of silence. Empty rooms, empty halls, empty hands. The board meeting had lasted just under 20 minutes. 15 years of Emma's work, her vision, her sleepless nights, her sacrifices, dismantled with a single vote. The motion had been carried by Patricia Collins, her most trusted executive. The woman who now sat in Emma's old chair and smiled as she said, "It's time for Sterling Industries to regain its composure." Composure. As if Emma had ever been anything else. She'd walked out of that boardroom with her back straight, her heels clicking like gunfire against the marble floor. But the moment the elevator doors closed, the steel inside her cracked. By the time she reached her car, the mask had shattered completely. The headlines were merciless. "Sterling out, board ousts CEO amid romance scandal. Janitor's love costs billion-dollar deal." Emma turned off her phone. The world didn't deserve her explanations. Not anymore. When she arrived home, the silence was unbearable. Jake and Sophie were gone. He'd texted earlier that morning. "Taking Sophie to my brother's in Albany for a few days. Need quiet, need space, no anger, no accusation, just distance. The kind that hurts worse than rage ever could." She walked through the mansion aimlessly, past the portrait gallery, past the study, until she reached the music room. The grand piano gleamed under the soft morning light. Sophie's little bench sat beside it, slightly crooked, the way she always left it after playing. Emma sat down at the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys for a long time. Then, slowly, she began to play. The melody was simple, hesitant, clumsy at first. A lullaby she barely remembered from her own childhood. Her grandmother used to hum it when Emma's parents were still alive, before the car crash. before Sterling Industries became her entire identity. She played the same 3 chords again and again until they started to sound like something real, something human. Maria found her there hours later, still in the same position. The housekeeper's kind, weathered face softened with worry. "Miss Emma?" she said quietly. "You haven't eaten all day." Emma didn't answer. Her voice was gone, lost somewhere between grief and music. Maria stepped closer, her tone gentle but firm. "You built everything here, Nina, but you forget. Houses don't hold people. People make houses warm." Emma blinked, tears threatening to spill. "They're gone, Maria. Jake, Sophie, even my company." Maria placed a hand over hers on the piano. "Then you start again. You always do." Emma wanted to believe her, but then her phone buzzed on the piano lid. A new message, unknown number. She hesitated before picking it up. It was Sarah. "Enjoying your empty castle? Sophie asks about you constantly. Jake looks miserable. Such a shame when families fall apart because of greed." Emma's breath hitched. Then came another notification. A news alert. "Breaking. Sarah Martinez wins temporary custody of daughter, pending full hearing." For a moment, the world tilted. She read the headline twice, 3 times, until the letters blurred. Temporary custody. That meant Sophie was already being taken. That Sarah, smiling for the cameras, twisting the story, was winning. Emma's stomach turned cold. She saw it all playing out in her mind. Sarah parading Sophie through interviews, turning her into a brand, a commodity, a paycheck. Maria reached for her shoulder, alarmed. "Miss Emma? What is it?" Emma's voice came out hollow. "She got her. Sarah has Sophie." The words felt foreign, wrong, unacceptable. Maria shook her head. "That woman doesn't love that child. She loves the attention." Emma stood suddenly, the piano bench scraping across the floor. "I can't let this happen." "Emma, listen to me," Maria pleaded. "If you go after her now, you'll make it worse. The press—" But Emma wasn't listening. She was already moving, her mind spinning faster than fear could stop her. She had nothing left to lose. Her title, her reputation, her control. They'd all been stripped away. But Sophie? Sophie was hope. The one thing that had made her remember she was more than a CEO, more than a name on a glass tower. "I won't let that woman raise her," Emma said, her voice trembling with a fury she hadn't felt in years. "Not after what she's done. Not after the lies." Maria followed her to the doorway, her expression torn between pride and fear. "Where will you go?" Emma grabbed her keys from the table. "Albany," she said. "To Jake, before she takes Sophie too far." The house was silent again as she left. But this time the silence didn't feel like defeat. It felt like momentum. Outside, the storm clouds were gathering, the kind that split skies open. The wind picked up, scattering fallen leaves across the long driveway as the engine roared to life. Emma tightened her grip on the wheel, eyes burning with determination. She'd lost her company, her status, her carefully built world. But she wasn't about to lose her family. Emma whispered to herself, "Not if I can help it," and grabbed her keys. The woman who had everything was now fighting for a child who wasn't hers, but felt like her heart. The Albany police station smelled of coffee and rain-soaked paper. It was the kind of place where time slowed down, where lives unraveled in quiet corners. And that morning, Jake Martinez sat in one of those corners, hands clasped, eyes red, his world collapsing one order at a time. Through a narrow glass window, he could see Sophie sitting on a metal bench with a stuffed bunny in her lap. A social worker knelt beside her, whispering something that made the little girl shake her head violently. "I don't want to go with her," Sophie cried. "I want my daddy." Jake slammed his fists against the table. "You can't just take her like this. She's my daughter." The officer behind the desk didn't even look up. "Sir, please calm down. The custody paperwork from the court in New York grants temporary guardianship to Ms. Sarah Martinez. Until a hearing is held, our hands are tied." "Temporary guardianship?" Jake repeated, the words slicing through him. She left her. She abandoned her. Before the officer could respond, the station doors swung open, and a gust of wind and fury walked in. Emma Sterling. Her hair was loose from the storm outside, her face pale but burning with purpose. Behind her, Michael Chen, Jake's lawyer and now her ally, marched in with a briefcase and an emergency court order. Michael Chen, New York Family Law, he announced sharply, flashing his credentials. We're filing an emergency petition for temporary guardianship on behalf of Ms. Sterling. The officer blinked, confused. Ms. Sterling, the CEO? Former CEO, Emma said, her voice steady, and current guardian of the child you're about to hand over to a woman who intends to sell her talent to the highest bidder. Jake stood, disbelief and relief colliding. Emma, how did you— No time, she cut in, her eyes fixed on Sophie through the glass. We're not leaving here without her. Moments later, another door opened, and Sarah Martinez appeared, flanked by a man in an expensive suit. She looked like she'd just stepped off a magazine cover, confident, polished, dangerous. Well, she said coolly, removing her sunglasses, isn't this a surprise? The disgraced billionaire and the janitor, playing heroes. Emma turned, fire in her eyes. You're not taking that child anywhere. Sarah smirked. You don't get to decide that, sweetheart. The law's on my side. Maybe you should have stuck to running companies instead of stealing families. Michael Chen stepped forward, opening his briefcase. Actually, Ms. Martinez, the law might disagree with you. He handed a stack of documents to the attending officer. This is a petition for emergency guardianship under Section 6061 of New York Family Code, based on substantial evidence that the biological mother intends to exploit the child's musical talent for financial gain. Sarah laughed. Exploitation? You really think a judge will buy that? Emma's expression hardened. I don't need them to buy it. I have proof. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a phone, and pressed play. Sarah's voice filled the small, fluorescent-lit room. The recording was unmistakable. Sophie could be the next big thing. I'm talking Carnegie Hall, world tours, endorsement deals. The kid could be worth $50 million by the time she's 10. Even the officer looked up this time. Sarah's smirk faltered. That was taken out of context, she said quickly. Emma didn't blink. The context was a meeting with a record executive. I have the emails, the receipts, and 3 witnesses willing to testify. Michael Chen nodded. It's all been submitted with the petition. If you proceed with this transfer, officer, you'll be in violation of an active emergency filing. The room was silent, thick with tension. The officer cleared his throat. Until I hear otherwise from the court, the child stays here. Sarah's facade cracked for a moment. You think this makes you the hero, Emma? You're playing a dangerous game. I don't play games with children's lives, Emma said coldly. Jake had been silent until now, standing a few feet away, torn between gratitude and disbelief. You did all this? For us? Emma turned to him, and in her eyes, he saw everything she hadn't said since that night they'd fallen apart. Regret, love, determination. For her, she whispered. For Sophie. As if on cue, the door to the observation room opened and Sophie ran out. Her small arms wrapped around Emma's waist, tears streaking her cheeks. Please don't let them take me, she sobbed. I just want to go home. Emma knelt, holding her tightly. You are home, sweetheart, she said softly. And I promise, no one's going to take that away from you again. Sarah's attorney stepped forward. This emotional display doesn't change the legal facts. But before he could finish, another voice echoed through the room. Firm, controlled, commanding. Actually, said a woman from the doorway, her gray hair perfectly pinned, her black robe unmistakable. It changes everything. Everyone turned. Judge Patricia Morrison, the same judge who'd presided over the original custody hearing, had arrived unannounced, her expression unreadable. I've reviewed the emergency filings, she said, setting her folder down on the desk. And before I make any decision, she looked directly at Sophie, whose tear-streaked face peeked out from Emma's embrace. "I'd like to hear what the child has to say." Judge Morrison walks in and says, "Then let's hear what the child has to say." When the judge asked her who she wanted, she didn't choose blood. She chose love. The courtroom was hushed. Not with silence, but with tension. The kind that filled every breath, every heartbeat, every shifting glance from the rows of spectators packed shoulder to shoulder. Cameras were banned, but the world was waiting outside. Judge Patricia Morrison adjusted her glasses as she looked over the file in front of her, her expression unreadable. At the front of the courtroom, Jake and Emma sat side by side at the petitioner's table. Between them, their fingers brushed, unnoticed by anyone but each other. It wasn't romantic. It was grounding. Across the aisle, Sarah Martinez sat with her high-priced attorney, her posture perfect, her makeup immaculate. But her eyes betrayed her, a flicker of nerves, a shadow of doubt. The bailiff called for order. "All rise." The judge entered, nodding to both sides before sitting down. "We're here to hear testimony in the matter of Sophie Martinez's custody. Before we begin with closing arguments," she said, her voice even, "I'd like to hear from the child herself." Every heart in the room seemed to skip a beat. Sophie was led forward by a kind-faced clerk, her little hand clutching the edge of the witness stand. She wore her favorite yellow dress, the one with small music notes embroidered along the hem. It made her look like sunshine in a room full of storm clouds. The judge leaned forward slightly. "Hello, Sophie." "Hi," the little girl said softly. "Do you understand why you're here today?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "Everyone's fighting about where I should live." The judge smiled gently. "That's right. And I want you to know something important. You don't have to be scared, okay? No one here wants to hurt you. We just want to understand what makes you happiest." Sophie glanced toward Jake and Emma, her small voice trembling. "Can I say something?" "You can say whatever you want, sweetheart," the judge replied. Sophie took a deep breath, her little hands clasping tightly in her lap. "I don't understand grown-ups sometimes," she began. "They say they love you, but then they yell and cry and make you feel like you're not enough." Her words landed like soft thunder in the room. Even Sarah blinked, caught off guard. Sophie continued, her voice steadier now. "My daddy always makes me pancakes on Sundays, and when I'm scared, he sits by my bed until I fall asleep. And Miss Emma—" She looked at Emma and smiled through tears. "Miss Emma listens when I play piano. She doesn't tell me what songs to play. She just listens, even the sad songs." Emma's hands tightened in her lap, her throat closing. Sophie turned toward Sarah. "I don't really remember you much," she said gently. "You smell different than home, and your voice is too loud for quiet rooms." Sarah shifted, her face frozen between pride and pain. Sophie went on, her small voice unwavering. "You said you wanted to help me be famous. But I don't want to be famous. I just want to play music that makes people feel things. Daddy says that's what music's supposed to do, make people feel less lonely." There wasn't a sound in the courtroom. No coughs, no whispers, not even the rustle of paper. The judge tilted her head. "So tell me, Sophie, where do you feel the most safe?" Sophie didn't hesitate. "With Daddy and Miss Emma, that's where my music feels happy." The simplicity of the answer shattered the composure of every adult in the room. Jake covered his mouth with one hand, blinking rapidly, while Emma's tears slid silently down her cheeks. Even Judge Morrison's normally impassive face softened. Sarah's lawyer stood, his voice cautious. "Your Honor, the child's emotional attachment is understandable, but it doesn't change the biological relationship." Judge Morrison held up a hand. "Enough." Her eyes moved from Sophie to Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, I've reviewed the evidence submitted, including recordings, financial statements, and witness testimony regarding your intentions for your daughter's musical career. Do you have anything you'd like to say before I rule?" Sarah stood slowly. Her carefully constructed mask wavered. I just wanted to give her what I never had. Opportunities. A life that mattered." Emma stood, unable to hold back, You can't make her matter by turning her into something she isn't. She already matters. To us. To everyone who's ever heard her play." The two women locked eyes, one stripped bare by guilt, the other by love. Sarah's voice cracked. "I didn't mean to hurt her." Emma's tone softened, but her words stayed sharp. "Then stop trying to own her. Just love her." The judge nodded slowly. "Ms. Martinez, your daughter's testimony speaks volumes. She's wise beyond her years, and her words tell me what my ruling should be." She shuffled her papers, her voice firm and clear. "Temporary custody of Sophie Martinez is hereby awarded jointly to Mr. Jake Martinez and Ms. Emma Sterling, effective immediately. Ms. Sarah Martinez will retain supervised visitation rights until further review." A wave of emotion swept through the room. Jake exhaled like a man breaking surface after nearly drowning. Emma closed her eyes, whispering a thank you she wasn't sure was to the judge or to fate. Sophie beamed. "Does that mean I can go home now?" The judge smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. You can go home." Sophie ran straight into Emma's arms, burying her face against her shoulder. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. Emma held her close. "I'll always come for you," she murmured. Across the room, Sarah sat quietly, staring down at her manicured hands. Her eyes glistened, not with anger, but with something closer to regret. Outside the courthouse, the world was still watching. Cameras waited, microphones poised for sound bites. But for the first time, Emma didn't care. She walked hand in hand with Jake and Sophie toward the car, the crowd's noise fading into background static. They had won. Not money, not status, but something real. Something no headline could twist. That night, back at the Sterling mansion, Sophie fell asleep on the couch between them, her small hand resting on the piano bench, as though afraid to let go. Emma looked at Jake, her voice soft. "We did it." Jake nodded. "You did it." But just as a fragile peace began to settle, the doorbell rang. Maria appeared with a hesitant look. "Miss Emma?" she said, holding a thick manila envelope. "A courier just delivered this. It says confidential." Emma frowned, taking it. The sender's name was familiar. Her private investigator. She opened the envelope carefully, her hands trembling slightly. Inside were photographs and a DNA report. Her eyes scanned the first line, and the color drained from her face. Jake noticed immediately. "What is it?" Emma's lips parted, but no words came. The pages trembled in her hand as she read the final line again and again, trying to make sense of it. The photographs showed Sarah standing beside a much younger woman, a woman who looked hauntingly familiar. And the report confirmed it. Sarah Martinez wasn't just Sophie's biological mother. She was Emma's half-sister. Emma's investigator delivers a file with a truth that would shake her entire world. The woman trying to destroy her wasn't just her rival. She was her sister. The words on the page refused to make sense. Emma Sterling sat at her desk, the thick manila envelope open before her, its contents scattered like shattered glass across the polished wood. The DNA report was official, notarized, undeniable. Subject A, Emma Sterling subject. B, Sarah Martinez. Result, 99.87% probability of half-sibling relation. Her breath came shallow, her pulse thudding in her ears. The photographs from the investigator showed her grandfather, Harold Sterling, standing beside a young woman with sharp green eyes and the same auburn hair Emma saw in her own reflection. The caption read, June 1962, New York City. Harold Sterling with Marjorie West, unmarried. Marjorie West, Sarah's mother. Emma felt the world tilt. Her grandfather, the man who'd raised her, who'd built the company she spent her life protecting, had abandoned a pregnant woman decades ago. The same betrayal Sarah had been born from, and the same wound she'd spent her life trying to avenge. The pieces clicked together in a slow, horrifying clarity. Sarah hadn't just wanted Sophie's custody. She'd wanted retribution. When Jake found Emma sitting there, she was still staring at the photos. Emma, he said softly. What is it? She turned the report toward him with trembling hands. She's my sister Jake. Sarah is my half-sister. He froze, scanning the pages, his expression shifting from disbelief to sorrow. Your sister? Harold Sterling had an affair before he married my grandmother. He left her, Sarah's mother, with nothing. He built an empire, and she raised a child in poverty. Emma's voice cracked. And that child grew up hating everything my name stood for. Jake sank into the chair opposite her, running a hand through his hair. So all of this, everything she's done, it wasn't just about Sophie. Emma nodded, her throat tightening. It was about me, about revenge. The night stretched heavy between them. Outside, rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rumbled like the past refusing to stay buried. Finally, Emma stood. I have to see her. Jake's head snapped up. Emma, that's not a good idea. I need to understand what she really wants, she said quietly. If there's even a chance this can end without tearing Sophie apart, I have to try. He looked at her for a long moment before sighing. Then I'm going with you. The next afternoon, Emma met Sarah in a quiet mid-town cafe, the kind with soft lighting and too much history in its walls. Sarah was already there, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her posture impeccable. When Emma approached, Sarah's expression didn't change, but her eyes flickered just once at the sight of her. You know, Sarah said, stirring her coffee with deliberate precision. I was wondering when you'd find out. Emma sat down across from her, the DNA report folded neatly in her bag. You knew? Sarah gave a small, bitter laugh. Of course I knew. My mother told me when I was 18. She said I had a sister living in a mansion built on the bones of the life she should have had. Emma swallowed hard. Sarah, what our grandfather did was wrong. I had no idea. Of course you didn't, Sarah cut in. You were busy being the golden child, the heir, the perfect Sterling, while I was waiting tables and wondering why people like you never had to pay for what men like him did. Her words were venomous. But beneath the bitterness, Emma heard something else. Pain. I didn't take anything from you, Emma said quietly. You think hurting me, taking Sophie away, will make up for what he did? It won't. You'll just pass that pain to another generation. Sarah's jaw tightened. Don't pretend this is about healing. You have everything. Wealth, power, a family that adores you. And you expect me to believe you just want peace? I do, Emma said simply. You're my sister, Sarah, whether you like it or not. And Sophie, she deserves both of us, not a war. Sarah laughed, sharp and cold. You'd share her, just like that? Emma leaned forward. Yes, joint custody. You'd have a real relationship with her. You'd get to be part of her life, not the reason it falls apart. We could end this now. For a moment, Sarah didn't speak. Her fingers stopped stirring the coffee. Her gaze dropped to the cup, then lifted slowly to meet Emma's. You really mean that, she said, almost in disbelief. I do. Sarah's lips curved, not in gratitude, but in something darker. You think forgiveness erases the past, Emma? It doesn't. You inherited everything that should have been mine. You get to play savior now because your guilt is convenient. Emma's heart sank. So that's your answer? Sarah stood, her chair scraping against the floor. I didn't come here for peace. I came to win, and I will. Emma's voice hardened. At what cost? Sarah looked back over her shoulder. Whatever it takes. When Emma walked out into the fading light, her hands were shaking. Not from fear, but from certainty. Sarah wasn't going to stop. This wasn't about Sophie anymore. It was about legacy, revenge, and old wounds that would never heal. She stood on the sidewalk for a long time, watching the city move around her, cars flashing past, strangers brushing shoulders. All that power, all that noise. And yet, she'd never felt smaller. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A message from Jake. Everything okay? Emma hesitated, then typed her reply with steady fingers. She chose revenge over family. Be ready for a fight. Emma texts Jake. She chose revenge over family. Be ready for a fight. In a courtroom full of strangers, A child's music healed 3 broken hearts. The courthouse buzzed like a storm about to break. Outside, reporters shouted over one another, cameras flashing, headlines already being written before the verdict. The billionaire, the janitor, and the prodigy child. But inside courtroom 7B, everything was still. Too still. Emma Sterling sat beside Jake Martinez at the petitioner's table, her fingers intertwined with his beneath the polished oak surface. His touch was warm, grounding, but she could feel the tremor in his hand. Ahead of them sat Judge Patricia Morrison, stern as ever, but today even her composure seemed softer, as if she understood that what she was about to decide would shape more than just one child's life. On the opposite side, Sarah Martinez sat with her attorney, posture perfect, expression carefully controlled. But something in her eyes betrayed the cracks beneath, the fatigue of fighting battles fueled by old wounds. The judge looked over her glasses. "We are here to conclude the matter of custody of minor Sophie Martinez. I have reviewed all new evidence, including testimony and the DNA results confirming familial connection between Ms. Sterling and Ms. Martinez." The courtroom rippled with murmurs, flashes of recognition. Reporters scribbled furiously. Emma kept her gaze steady. She had nothing left to hide, nothing left to prove except that love, not blood, defined family. Judge Morrison cleared her throat. "Before I deliver my judgment, the child has requested to perform something for the court. Normally, such gestures are not standard procedure, but given the circumstances, I will allow it." Sophie, wearing a white dress trimmed with small gold ribbons, stood up shyly from the front row. Maria, the housekeeper who'd become more like a grandmother, gave her an encouraging nod. Emma and Jake both turned as their little girl climbed the steps to a small, upright piano brought into the courtroom that morning. Its presence had felt almost out of place, a symbol of art amid law. But now, it made perfect sense. The bailiff adjusted the microphone. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Sophie looked up at the judge, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wrote this song last night. It's called My Family." Her fingers touched the keys, hesitant at first, then sure. The first notes were soft, fragile, like a lullaby sung to a broken heart. The melody carried traces of sorrow, of nights spent wondering why people who loved each other still fought. Then, gradually, the music grew bolder. New themes emerged, tiny flickers of joy, the innocence of a child who still believed that love could fix what anger had broken. Emma felt tears rise unbidden. Every note spoke words Sophie didn't have the vocabulary to say. It was the sound of forgiveness, of belonging, of a heart big enough to hold 2 mothers, a father, and all the pain between them. Jake's chest rose and fell unevenly, his calloused hand trembling against his knee. Across the aisle, Sarah's eyes widened as if she were hearing her daughter for the first time. The melody swelled, then fell into a soft resolution that lingered like a whispered prayer. The final note hung in the air, pure and unwavering, before fading into silence. No one moved. No one even dared to breathe. Then, slowly, Judge Morrison took off her glasses and dabbed at her eyes. "That," she said quietly, "was the most honest testimony I've ever heard." Sophie looked uncertain. "Did you like it?" The judge smiled. "Sweetheart, I think everyone here did." Sarah rose from her seat, her voice trembling. "Your Honor." The entire courtroom turned to her. The confident, defiant woman was gone. In her place stood someone stripped of pretense. "I can't do this anymore," Sarah whispered. "I thought I was fighting for my daughter, but really, I was fighting against everything I never had. A family, a chance. I don't want to take that from her." She turned toward Emma, eyes glistening. "She deserves both of us, but I can see she's happiest with you. You love her the way I should have. I'd like visitation rights, to be part of her life, but not to own it." Emma stood, her heart breaking and mending all at once. You'll always be part of her life, Sarah. She'll know her mother. And maybe someday her aunt, too. For the first time, Sarah's tears fell freely. She nodded, unable to speak. Judge Morrison's voice was soft but firm. Then it settled. Custody of Sophie Martinez will be granted jointly to Mr. Martinez and Ms. Sterling, with liberal visitation rights for Ms. Martinez. I'm also ordering family therapy for all parties. She smiled faintly. This child has already taught us all a lesson in love and grace. The least we can do is try to live up to it. Applause broke out quietly in the gallery before the bailiff restored order. But it didn't matter, because in that moment, the sound of unity drowned out everything else. 6 months later, the Sterling estate glowed beneath the afternoon sun. The garden was alive with laughter, flowers in full bloom, guests gathered beneath white canopies. At the center stood a white grand piano draped in lilies. Emma adjusted her lace veil nervously as Jake squeezed her hand. You ready for this? I've faced boardrooms full of billionaires, she whispered, but nothing compares to marrying you. At the piano, Sophie smiled, her curls crowned with small blossoms. This one's called Harmony, she said proudly. As her fingers danced across the keys, the air filled with a melody that was both joyful and gentle. Notes from all their past songs intertwined into something whole. Sarah sat in the front row, hands clasped in her lap, smiling through tears. Even Maria dabbed at her eyes, muttering prayers of gratitude. Jake and Emma exchanged vows beneath the soft music, promising to protect their family. This strange, imperfect, beautiful family forged not by blood, but by love. When Sophie struck the final chord, the audience rose to its feet. The applause wasn't for the performance. It was for everything it represented. Forgiveness, healing, belonging. Emma knelt beside her daughter, tears glistening in her eyes. You did it, sweetheart, she whispered. You brought us all home. Sophie grinned. Music told me how. And as the final note faded into the evening sky, Emma realized that families weren't something you inherited. They were something you built. One choice, one act of love, one note at a time. Some families are born, but the truest ones are chosen, note by note. If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll away. Share it with someone who still believes in love, forgiveness, and second chances. Every like, comment, and share helps us bring more stories that remind the world what family truly means. Subscribe now and be part of our growing community of hearts that feel before they judge. Tell us in the comments, what does family mean to you?